My parents are forcing me to take care of my abusive ex after his accident, and now he's trying to propose again while my family encourages me to forgive him for everything. When my mum, Linda, 58F, called to tell me that my ex, Evan, 32M, had been in a bad accident, I thought she was just letting me know for my own awareness. Even hearing his name was enough to bring back a rush of memories I didn't want, years of belittling, isolation, and hurt. But what I didn't expect was for her to say gently, "He's been asking for you, sweetheart. He's all alone in that hospital room, and I think it would mean the world to him if you visited. He's had a hard time." I was stunned. "Mom, he's my ex for a reason. You know what he put me through." I thought that would be enough for her to back off, but instead she sighed, almost as though I was the one being unreasonable. "People change, honey. Evan's been through so much, and he has no one else. Maybe it's time to put the past behind you. Show him a little compassion." Compassion? After the years I'd spent untangling myself from the grip of that relationship. Evan had started off charming, but it hadn't taken long for that charm to turn to control, then manipulation, and finally something darker. He cut me off from friends, convinced me my family was against me, and isolated me to the point where I felt completely trapped. It had taken so much strength to leave, and now here I was being asked to go back to him. "Mom, I spent years recovering from what he did to me. How can you even ask this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Honey, I know it was hard," she said softly, her tone gentle but persistent. "But he's in such a bad place now, and he's had a lot of time to think. He's sorry, and I really think he's changed. I know he made mistakes, but everyone deserves forgiveness." I could barely believe my ears. Evan hadn't made mistakes. He'd shattered my confidence, my friendships, and nearly my sanity. And my own mother, who'd been there to watch me pick up the pieces, was asking me to just forgive him. She was practically saying I owed him another chance. But she didn't let up. "Just one visit," she urged. "He's asking to see you, and he has no one else. He even said he's got things he wants to make right." I wanted to hang up, but I felt the weight of her expectations. My dad, Bill 61M, chimed in on speaker, backing her up. "Evan's been through a lot, and he's all alone now. Maybe he deserves a chance to apologize, if nothing else. It's the right thing to do." They kept going on, and the guilt started settling in. My family had always stood by me, and now here they were, asking me to do just one small thing for someone I hadn't seen in years. I finally gave in. "Fine," I said. "One visit, but that's it." The next day, I went to the hospital, my stomach in knots the entire drive. I hadn't seen Evan since the breakup, and I could barely keep it together as I walked into his room. He looked up, his face lighting up the moment he saw me. He was pale, with a cast on his leg and bandages up his arm, and his eyes were soft, almost pleading. "Thank you for coming," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I'm only here because my parents asked me to be," I replied flatly, needing to keep that boundary clear. "This doesn't change anything between us." He nodded, his gaze dropping as he took a breath. "I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But this accident, it made me realize what I lost. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. If I could go back, I'd change everything." I tried to hold back my anger, the old familiar feeling of manipulation tightening around me. "I'm glad you thought about it," I managed to say, "but I didn't come here to start over." Evan's face fell, and for a moment, I thought he'd let it go. But then he took a deep breath, his eyes softening. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you if I have to." I almost laughed. He'd spent years tearing me down, and now he was acting like we'd had some tragic love story. I left as soon as I could, not looking back. But as I walked out of the hospital, my phone buzzed with a message from my mum. "How did it go? Isn't it nice to know he's changed?" And I knew this was far from over. As soon as I got back home, the messages from my parents started pouring in. My mum's texts were gushing, one after the other. "I talked to Evan. He said he was so grateful you visited. Doesn't it feel good to forgive?" And then the one that really got me. "We're so proud of you, honey. It takes a big heart to give him a chance again. A chance? They thought I was giving him a chance. I texted back, trying to be clear. I'm not forgiving him. I went because you both wouldn't stop pressuring me. But that's it. There was no answer at first. I tried to let it go, hoping that would be the end of it. But later that night, Mom called, her voice carrying a hint of disappointment. "Oh, sweetie, I think you're being a bit harsh. He's had a horrible time, and he's so eager to make things right. What's the harm in giving him another chance?" I gritted my teeth, trying not to lose my patience. "Mom, the harm is that he spent years breaking me down. He isolated me from everyone, made me feel like I was the problem. I don't want him back in my life." She sighed heavily, as though I were missing something obvious. "But he's alone now, honey. He's made mistakes, yes, but he's truly sorry, and who else will look after him?" "Not me," I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. "I can't go back to that. Why can't you understand that?" "Because I think you're overreacting," she said softly. "You have a good heart, and maybe you can help him turn his life around. He's a changed man now, but he's broken, and maybe you're the one who can help him heal." Her words lingered, wrapping me in a guilt I couldn't shake. Even after we ended the call, I felt the familiar pull of doubt. What if she was right? What if he had changed? But the memories of how he'd once made me feel, small, worthless, dependent on his approval, were too fresh, no matter how much time had passed. Then, a few days later, my dad called. Bill was usually quieter about his opinions, but this time he was firm. "Look, sweetheart," he began, his voice low and careful, "your mother and I just think you're being too hard on Even. He told us he wants to make amends, maybe even marry you, make a real life together. And honestly, I don't see why you wouldn't consider it." The shock of his words made me go silent. "Dad, are you serious? After everything I've told you about what he put me through?" "It was a tough relationship, sure," he said, as if that was all it was. "But he's changed. You don't want to be alone forever, do you? We both just want to see you happy and settled down. He's trying to make things right, and I think that's worth something." "Happy and settled down," I repeated, barely believing what I was hearing. "With Evan?" "Just think about it," he said gently. "You might find that forgiveness brings peace. We'll be here to support you through it." When I hung up, I felt that old feeling of isolation creeping back in, the kind I'd had all those years with Evan. Here I was alone again, except this time it was my own family making me feel that way. The next day, my parents called with a new suggestion. Since Evan had nowhere else to go, they wanted to bring him home to their place to recover. "It'll give him the support he needs," my mom said, her voice hopeful. "And he'll be so close by too." I couldn't believe it. "You're bringing him into the family home? What, so you can play matchmaker?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," she replied, brushing me off. "It's a way for him to heal, and maybe for you to see that he's truly changed. What's the harm in visiting while he's here?" It felt like every boundary I'd put up was being stripped away, but they wouldn't hear any of it. They wanted me to see the new Ivan, the version they believed was reformed and repentant, as though a few injuries could rewrite the past. I knew I had to set them straight, to make them understand that forgiveness wasn't an option, not after everything he'd done. The day Ivan moved into my parents' house, I felt a sick twist in my stomach. I'd managed to avoid seeing him again since that hospital visit, but now with him staying so close to home, I knew it would only get harder. Not even an hour passed before my phone buzzed with messages from my mom, who seemed to be over the moon about having him there. "Even looks so much better now that he's here. He's grateful, you know, and he's been asking about you." I ignored it, trying to focus on anything but the thought of him in my parents' home. But then, later that evening, my dad called and asked me to come over for dinner. "Evan's eager to see you," he said. "We're all sitting down for a nice meal. Just come for a little while." I knew what this meant, a family ambush, thinly veiled as a family dinner. But despite every instinct telling me to stay away, I felt the pressure to go. Maybe it was years of wanting my parents' approval, or maybe it was just a desire to keep things from escalating. Either way, I reluctantly agreed. When I arrived, Evan was already seated at the table, his cast propped up and looking painfully at ease, as though he'd never left. My parents welcomed me in with bright smiles, my mum giving me a hug and urging me to sit by Ivan. I forced a smile, making my way to the far side of the table. The dinner conversation was painfully forced. My parents asked Ivan about his recovery, practically hanging on every word he said. He told them how much this time in reflection had changed him, how the accident had opened his eyes to the way he'd treated people in the past. Then he looked directly at me. "Especially you, Ella," he said, his voice low and contrite. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never be able to fully make up for that. But I want to try, if you'll let me." I glanced at my parents, who were watching me expectantly, their eyes practically begging me to respond with forgiveness. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Even, I appreciate the apology, but the past isn't something I can just erase. I've moved on, and I don't want to revisit it." Evan's face fell, and my mom jumped in, shaking her head slightly as though I'd said something hurtful. "Ella, he's trying so hard. Can't you meet him halfway?" It felt like a trap, like they'd already decided I was the problem if I didn't cave into their narrative. I stayed silent, hoping that would be enough to drop the subject, but Evan wasn't done. "I understand," he said, his tone suddenly smoother. "But maybe we can just start over. I'm a different man now, Ella, and I'd give anything to make things right between us." The words felt rehearsed, each one an echo of promises he'd made before, promises he'd broken again and again. I shook my head. "I don't think that's possible." But Evan didn't stop. "At least consider it. I know I don't deserve it, but this accident, it's shown me that life's too short to hold on to grudges. I want to be there for you." My parents were nodding along like spectators to a speech they'd waited years to hear. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We just want what's best for you, Ella." And maybe that's giving Evan a chance to prove he's changed. Everyone deserves that, don't they? The frustration bubbled up, my voice slipping from calm to strained. No, everyone doesn't deserve that, especially not him. I looked around the table, willing them to understand. I spent years trying to be what he wanted, and I lost myself in the process. Now you're asking me to throw all that growth away to make him feel better. Evan looked down, and I almost believed he felt some kind of remorse. But I knew him too well. This was a carefully crafted performance, one he perfected over years of manipulation. He would say the right words, act the right way, and hope I'd fall back into his orbit. My dad leaned forward, his expression softening. "We're not asking you to lose yourself, sweetheart. We're just asking you to open your heart a little. It might bring you peace." At that, I felt something snap inside me. Peace. I had to rebuild myself from scratch after everything he did to me. And I finally found that peace without him. This isn't about healing. This is about you wanting me to fit into a version of forgiveness that's convenient for everyone but me. A silence fell over the table, the weight of my words settling heavily in the room. My mom looked at me, clearly taken aback, and Evan's face turned red, his mask slipping just slightly. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it understood. But then Evan shook his head, putting on an expression of hurt as he said, "I get it, Ella. You're angry. I deserve that. But if there's any chance at all, that you could forgive me, I'll keep trying. I'll wait as long as it takes." I pushed my chair back, feeling trapped. I couldn't do this. Not now, not ever. I stood up, my heart racing. "I don't want you waiting for anything. I want you to accept that I'm moving on, with or without your approval." Without looking back, I grabbed my things and left. My parents didn't follow me, but I could feel their disappointment clinging to me like a weight. As I stepped outside, I felt the fresh air hit me, reminding me that I was free, that I'd chosen to leave Ivan, and I didn't have to go back. No matter how hard my parents tried to force forgiveness on me, I knew I was done. The days after that dinner were filled with silence from my parents. Normally, my mom would call me daily, but there was nothing. No texts, no "how are you?" Just radio silence. Part of me was relieved, hoping they'd finally accepted my decision. But another part knew it wasn't over. My parents didn't take no for an answer when they thought they were doing something for my own good. Then, one evening, my mom finally called. I answered, bracing myself for what I knew was coming. "Hi, honey," she started, a tone light, like we hadn't just had a blowout at the dinner table. "I wanted to let you know that Ivan's been asking about you. He's really struggling with everything, you know. He's feeling so lost, and I think it would mean a lot to him if you could just talk things through." "Mom, I thought we settled this," I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I told you I'm not interested in seeing him, and definitely not interested in talking things through." She let out a long sigh. "Honey, he's hurting. He has no one else, and he keeps telling us how much he regrets what he did. He even mentioned that he's been thinking about counseling." Counseling? I almost laughed. The idea of Ivan in counseling seemed like another one of his attempts to say what he thought people wanted to hear. But I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "I know it sounds strange, people really do change, and you were a big part of his life. Maybe you could be the reason he finally turns things around." The weight of her words hit me. She wasn't just asking me to forgive him, she was practically expecting me to save him. "Mom, why do you want this so badly? Why do you keep pushing me to go back to him when I've told you how much he hurt me?" She hesitated, then her voice softened. "Because, honey, I worry about you. You're always alone. Ivan made mistakes, but he wants to be a better man, and maybe he could make you happy now. We just don't want to see you lonely." I felt like I'd been punched. I knew my parents were traditional, that they wanted me to settle down, to have a family. But the idea that they'd push me back towards someone like Ivan, just so I wouldn't be alone, left me feeling numb. "Mom," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I would rather be alone than be with someone who spent years tearing me down. If that's what you think is happiness, then maybe you don't understand me at all." She sighed, clearly frustrated. "You're being stubborn, Ella. You're letting your anger blind you. Sometimes forgiveness is the only way to truly move on." "Forgiveness," I repeated, feeling my voice shake with anger. "Forgiveness isn't a pass to go back to someone who nearly broke me. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we need some space." Her voice grew cold. "Fine, Ella. If that's how you feel, then maybe we do." I hung up, my heart pounding as the weight of her words settled over me. My own family was choosing to push me away because I wouldn't reconcile with my abuser. It felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare, but this was real. A few days later, my dad called, and I almost didn't pick up. But his message was short, even apologetic. "Ella, we'd like to talk. Your mother and I have been thinking things over. Can we come by your place tomorrow?" Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping they'd finally heard me. When they showed up, both of them looked worn and tense, but they were quieter than usual, like they were carefully choosing their words. My dad started. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said, Ella. We don't want to lose you over this. We just worry. You seem so closed off lately, and we just want you to be happy." I took a deep breath. "Dad, I am happy. I'm finally finding peace. But every time you bring Evan up, it feels like you're trying to pull me back to a place I fought so hard to leave." My mom spoke up, her voice a little softer than before. "I guess we didn't realize how much pain you were still carrying. We thought that maybe helping him would bring you closure." "Closure doesn't mean dragging him back into my life," I said firmly. "Closure is living without him, without any of his influence over me. And if you love me, you'll respect that." They both nodded, looking at each other before my mom finally whispered, "We're sorry, Ella. I hope you know we only wanted what we thought was best." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. This wasn't a full understanding, but it was the closest they'd come to acknowledging my boundaries. After that conversation, things finally started to settle. My parents didn't bring up Ivan again, and I could feel the tension between us loosening bit by bit. They still called often, but there was a new respect in their tone, a willingness to talk about my life, my goals, without any hint of pushing me toward a past I'd worked so hard to escape. It was a relief, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of control over my own life. But then, one night, as I was winding down for bed, I received a message from Ivan himself. It was simple, just 2 lines. I'm still so sorry for everything. I wish we could try again, Ella." I felt a surge of anger, then numbness. I knew my parents hadn't given him my number. He must have had it saved from years ago. But here he was, trying to pull me back in, even after I'd made it clear to everyone that I was done. Taking a deep breath, I replied simply, "Even, please don't contact me again. I've moved on, and I ask that you respect that." I blocked his number, feeling the weight of finality settle over me. This was my life now, on my terms. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into the things I loved, catching up with old friends, exploring hobbies I'd set aside, and finally feeling like I was becoming myself again. My parents and I had tentative, careful conversations, and while there were moments of tension, they seemed to be trying to understand me. We were learning how to reconnect on my terms, not theirs. One weekend, my mom called with a surprise. "Your dad and I were wondering if you'd like to go on a trip with us, just the three of us. Maybe some time away will help us reconnect." I hesitated, but her voice sounded so genuine, and I realized I was ready to rebuild slowly and carefully. "I'd like that," I replied, feeling warmth replace the anger I'd carried for so long. As the weeks passed, we fell into a new rhythm, one that was rooted in mutual respect. They'd stopped pushing, and I could see that they'd started to accept me for who I was now, not who they thought I should be. I felt proud, not just of my progress, but of my parents' willingness to change too. One evening, as we watched the sunset together on our trip, my mom squeezed my hand, her voice soft. "I never understood the strength it took to walk away, Ella. But I do now. I'm so proud of you." I smiled, feeling a long overdue peace settle over me. Even was finally behind me, along with the hold he'd had on my life. I knew I'd done the right thing for myself and for my future. And for the first time, I could look forward without fear.